Hey everyone, we're going to give everyone just a minute or two to get in, and we'll get started in about 2 minutes. All right. Thanks everyone for joining this webinar on preventing high velocity attacks during the holiday season. I'm Bradley Chalupsky. We did a group vote to go video this time, so this is the face behind the name. And before we get started, I'm just going to give you a quick intro about Merchant Fraud Journal for people who might be attending their first webinar with us. So we're founded by two former fraud industry professionals. We pride ourselves on being independent and unbiased, a voice in the industry dedicated to empowering sellers to reduce the impact of fraud. And we try to publish insightful articles from thought leaders and merchants from across the entire spectrum about all types of fraud. And our audience includes senior level decision makers at enterprise companies, small business owners, everything in between. We're very proud of the reach that we have across a wide swath of the community. And we use that to produce unique resources with community outreach. And we really pride ourselves on being able to pool the knowledge from across the e-commerce fraud prevention landscape. And we like to think that we've cultivated a sense of trust with our community, and we really appreciate all the support that we get. And as a community resource, we wanted to tackle the problem of high velocity attacks as we head into the critical holiday period. So we brought in Ensure.ai. Really appreciate them agreeing to be on the webinar here. They're one of the absolute leaders in detecting and preventing these kinds of attacks, along with some other very, very special guests that we have here today that have a ton of specialized expertise in this area. And they're going to cover a lot of grounds and give a lot of insights. So I'll hand it over to you guys and let everybody introduce themselves and get started.
Sure. So I'll start. My name is Alex Zeltzer. I'm CEO and co-founder of Ensure.ai. I've been fighting fraud both at Ensure.ai and the previous company that was a gift card marketplace for a while, over 5 years now, and a lot of companies earlier than that. And very happy to be here, Bradley. Thank you very much for for having us. Any chance we have on helping the industry, get better insights and help fight fraud is most welcome.
Absolutely. So we'll let our panelists all introduce themselves. Just give a quick intro of who you are so everyone knows who they're speaking with, and then you guys can take it away.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brock Kay. I'm the head of sales at Just. We fight chargebacks. If you do end up with a chargeback, we can help you recover your revenue.
Hi, my name is Alexander Hall. Thank you guys all for being here. I have 14 years of experience between fraud and fraud prevention, the first 10 years of which I operated as a high-level fraudster here in Las Vegas. And for the last 4.5, almost 5 years, I've been operating as an agent of fraud prevention. Last year, 2020, I launched Dispute Defense Consulting, where we help merchants and service providers formulate effective fraud prevention strategies. We've seen pretty good success. And I'm also on the board of advisors for UNLV's customer experience program. So that's me. Thank you guys for being here. And I'll pass it on.
Hi, my name is Noam. I've been involved with fintech and e-commerce for over 10 years. I've also been one of the first employees in Forder, about 7 years ago now. Today, I'm an early stage fintech investor and also one of the proud investors in Ensure AI. Yeah, very happy to be here.
Hey guys, my name is Miguel Maharis. I am also with Ensure AI. I have previous experience in other leading solution providers in this space, namely a former employee of Forder, as well as Signify, and I will be moderating today's wonderful panel. So looking forward to it.
So thank you guys. Thank you all for being here. Obviously, just to get it all in context, I'm gonna kick it off with a short presentation of taking you guys through how did we get here as an industry? How did we, as an industry of fraud prevention platforms and systems, got there? And I'm gonna start with actually how this became a merchant issue, right? In brick and mortar, obviously, the fraud is not a merchant issue. So first of all, how did we end up taking that liability? It all started when brick and mortar, the merchants were used to getting cash for their products. Everything was fine and dandy. Been doing that for decades until credit cards emerged, and a credit card company would come to a merchant and say, guys, next week you're gonna start seeing people come in with a plastic card. We're gonna give you a small machine. That machine you're gonna use to imprint that card onto a piece of paper. You're gonna log in the amount that's owed to you. You're gonna put it in your cash register and deliver the products. Obviously, the merchant said, you guys are crazy. There's no way we're delivering the products before we get the cash. Not doing that. Then they said, no, don't worry. We're actually a bank. So we guarantee that. So once you have that piece of paper and it's signed by the owner, we guarantee you're gonna get the funds. Obviously, they did the same on the other side, meaning if the consumer loses the card, they never lose funds, right? They always back that up. So they guaranteed both ends. Otherwise, this entire credit card industry wouldn't have been able to kind of proliferate as it has. And then, it worked for a few years. And then a few years later, the merchants came back to the credit card companies and said, I have an amazing client here. Let's say it's Miguel. He places an order every Tuesday for $500 worth of groceries. And he comes in every Friday, just at rush time, a terrible time for him to come in. He comes in, he still needs to stay in line, get to the cash register. I still need to take his plastic card, do this drill with the machine you gave me, print this card, put the numbers in, etc., etc. It makes no sense. We all understand it's just the number on the card. Why don't you let me take the number on the phone? I write it down on that same piece of paper that I'm going to imprint it otherwise. I'm going to put in the sum, put in the cash and cash register, and that's it. Sounds easy. So the guys at the credit card company thought about it a little bit and said, you know what? It sounds great, right? We'll get more revenues. You'll get more revenues. It'll be easier for you. However, you didn't see the person. You're not certain it is. If you're confident, that's the person you're speaking to, you know him for years, that's the guy, take the transaction. However, we're not going to guarantee it. This is now a card not present transaction. That's how it all started. And this is not going to be guaranteed by us. That's your problem. That is your liability. And obviously, 20 years down the line, as soon as e-commerce came to be and merchants came back to the credit card companies and said, guys, there's a new thing, the internet, and we want to take transactions online. And there's going to be a big business. Would you allow us to take these transactions? The credit card company said, yes, of course, but how does it all work? And the merchants explained a little bit. I'm telling it as a story, obviously, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but the gist of it is, they heard that and they said, okay, we have a solution for it. That's a card not present transaction. Not a problem. It is your problem. It is your liability. And that's how it came to be, that these transactions, everything that is transacted online to this date is the merchant liability. And that actually gave birth to a whole new industry of high-tech companies that help merchants take the right decision. So obviously merchants are not in the business of fraud prevention. It all started with companies that looked at payment information. Is that card stolen? Was that card stolen? Is it flagged by anyone, etc., etc. Continued on with looking at devices and people. Later on, we started calling stuff like that address verification services and whatnot. And later on, this became huge databases of IPs, devices, identities, addresses, email addresses, you name it. A little bit further down the line, it created rule engines that help merchants orchestrate all of these different pieces of information into a large algorithm that eventually takes a decision whether to accept or reject a transaction. And then 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when with AI becoming more practical, we started seeing companies providing a risk score, not only just an indication of how old the email address is, or whether that IP has been seen doing any kind of fraudulent activity in the last month or so. But you look at all of the data and you say this is 80% risky, this is 20% risky, and you as a merchant, you take that together with all the other pieces of information you have, and you take a decision. And just one step following that came a new idea, a new concept, and Fraud Prevention 2.0 was invented, and chargeback guarantee came to life. And this started with a company called Fraud Sciences. That was, by the way, as soon as they invented the model, was acquired by PayPal. And out of that acquisition, two teams came out and formed Forter and Riskified, and obviously eventually led to the creation of Signified as well in the US. And these companies started providing the service of a decision as a service plus guaranteeing it, saying, guys, we'll provide you not a risk score and not information. We'll take the decision for you and we will guarantee it. Meaning, if the transaction eventually that we approve is eventually charged back, we will pay for the chargeback. It is now our liability. And this has been going on now for probably 6, 7, maybe a little bit more than that. And then I want to take you through a little bit beyond that. And take as an example the digital goods industry that obviously Insure.ai specializes in, but just use it as an example. There's a very big difference between a standard e-commerce with physical goods and digital goods. The key difference is the fact that there's a delay in delivery. If you think about it, the loss for a merchant that is selling physical goods does not occur until the goods are actually shipped from the warehouse. This could be a day or two after the transaction and gives time both for the merchant, both for the risk management platforms, and for the entire network to reassess the risk. That's not possible if you're selling digital gift cards or airline tickets or games. The delivery is immediate, the loss of value is immediate, so should be the decision. And as a result of that, it attracts fraudsters that commit these high velocity attacks that we'll talk about in a minute here over the panel, that are actually creating attacks that look very similar to DDoS, look very similar to distributed denial of service. It's like waves of identities that all look legit and are looking to kind of suck up all of your inventory. It led to a creation of such an industry. And obviously the tools you need in order to fight that are different. That's not true only for digital goods, that's true for other industries as well. And this is what we believe is going to be the Fraud Prevention 3.0, where the platforms are really dedicated on a per industry or a per vertical basis and are providing a much more accurate and a much stronger tool to fight fraud that is obviously becoming better and better over time. So that's it from a fraud prevention perspective. However, what we envision that is going to happen over the next probably couple of decades, not much faster than that, is that the entire liability is going to be shifted eventually back to the banks, where it should have been from day one. It's going to take some time because a lot of the data that's required is not available for the banks. A lot of the data that you guys as merchants have is not available for the banks today, and therefore they are not able to make the right decisions. But it is a strong belief that we will see regulation take it to the next level and getting it back to the banks, obviously using tools such as Riskified or Forter or Ensure or Sift or Certify or you name it. However, that's obviously not going to happen for this coming holiday season, which is why we have this esteemed panel to try and help you through that period of time with a little bit of more insights. So with that, I take it through and thank you all for listening in and handing it over to Miguel to kind of lead the panel.
Thank you, Alex. Very insightful. So hey, everyone, we have a very strong panel for you all today, covering very different perspectives in the industry, right? As previously mentioned, we have Noam Inbar. She's a former executive at Forder and was a very integral part of that business and the success it has today. We have Brock Kay from Just, an authority figure and leader in full service charge record resentment. So he'll be able to talk to what happens when you do get hit. I'm very happy to announce that we also have Alexander Hall, who literally has firsthand experience in how fraudsters attack merchants, right? And as a former high-level fraudster himself, he's now leveraging that experience to help merchants globally protect themselves better. And on the other side of the coin, our very own Alex Zeltzer, who has literal first-hand experience being attacked as a merchant himself formerly, and now with Insure AI protecting digital good merchants. So with that, guys, we have a lot of ground to cover. So let's get right into it. The first topic, and I think the first question here is for Alexander, is, look, it's November 2nd. Holiday season is right at the doorsteps for these merchants, and there's always anxiety for fraud analysts around this time of year. What can we help our audience with, and what types of fraud attacks should merchants be on high alert for this holiday season?
Absolutely. So, as we all know, the landscape shift of 2020, right, led to everybody shifting over to e-commerce from in-store. Now, that's going to open up a lot of game for fraudsters in order to start attacking e-commerce. That makes sense. But it's important to understand that most of the methods that, or the fair majority of methods that are employed by fraudsters exist all the way across the spectrum. It might originate in a checkout form for some reason, but it might be shifted at the customer service level in order to change shipping addresses or something like that. So the three methods that I want to bring up that I had intimate experience with, we're going to be gift cards, as you mentioned. It's also going to be shipping under the guise of holiday gifts, something like that. And then the third one that I wanted to mention was secondary marketplace purchases. So like so to touch on the first one, the gift cards, one thing that happened regularly and was very profitable was the ability to go manipulate physical gift cards in store. This could lead to $15,000 or $30,000 over any holiday season. And the way it works is fraudsters will go into the store, grab a stack of gift cards from the gift card rack, like at a Walmart or something like that, go home, copy the track data, copy the information and the PIN number, and then go put them back on the rack during another visit. What happens is then the customer will come and they'll buy those. And if the fraudster stays on track and checks them throughout the holiday season, they then have access to those funds. So that's one thing, and that's in store. The same thing applies to e-gift cards. If a company that is selling either proprietary gift cards, like their own gift cards, and doesn't employ a fraud prevention solution, those e-gift cards, as was mentioned, are going to be delivered immediately. When that happens, they can be sold secondarily, or before the chargeback comes in, they can be leveraged and utilized. And there's a lot of risk when it comes to the gift cards. Okay, so the next one that I wanted to mention was the shipping under the guise of gifts. Fraudsters are aware that it is normal to see some accounts be shipping items with unassociated shipping addresses. So you're going to send out you're going to buy with one set of billing information, but it's going to have an unassociated shipping address. Fraudsters are aware of this. They're also aware of IP address manipulation and things like that. So as we move into the holiday season, it's important to know the importance of leveraging the data that you have access to and maybe look into expanding your data sets. The third one was oh no, that was them. So secondary marketplace, selling off items that are in high demand. There we go. Like we saw with the PlayStations when they first came out, fraudsters would go buy them up. They were a hot item, and then they get sold in the black market or in secondary marketplaces for a lot. So those are the three that I wanted to touch on today. And the idea that I would really stress is to understand that fraudsters are aware of how operations shift. They might not know exactly what your shift's going to be, but they understand what you expect during the holiday season. And that's why I push so heavily that you employ strategies across the entire customer journey to watch for these things and learn what it looks like for you. And of course, there's always tips and tricks, but I'll leave it there for now.
Great, thanks, Alexander. I might touch upon that last point you just made in terms of interactions and touch points on every part of the journey. But you mentioned something about gift cards and digital gift cards, and I think I wanted to ask a question to Noam. Since Noam, you had a lot of experience in those earlier days of when 2.0 was evolving to 3.0, and the difference between virtual goods and physical goods. So, from your perspective, how do you see the differences between the virtual good and physical good industries in terms of a fraud prevention, and why is it important to have different approaches for both when protecting these goods?
Sure. So I think that virtual goods and digital goods attract sometimes a different type of fraudster, right? They have the reward is much more immediate because you don't need to go and sell the goods. So sometimes we see the more professional fraudsters attack those industries rather than physical goods that you can, sometimes see kind of more amateur fraudsters. It's not, of course, you have the professionals targeting physical goods as well, especially in the luxury, but in general, I think virtual goods attract the more sophisticated fraudsters. And we need to keep in mind, just like fraud prevention is evolving and has, so much technology, fraudsters are also evolving and are utilizing a lot of technology and are utilizing, deep fake and all kinds of methods that, we didn't see several years back. And I think it's much more popular in those kind of, the closer it gets to being actual money. So virtual goods, gift cards, anything that is more similar to actual money that you can take and use, you see the more professional fraudsters there. And also you have less data. You don't have the entire side of the shipping address and kind of the correlations between shipping address and billing address. And so you're essentially missing a big part of the data when you deal with virtual goods. So I think those are some of the challenges. And I think in general, a vertical approach is very popular in this space. So you can't treat virtual goods like traditional retail. You see, even the level, the fraud thresholds there are totally different. It's a very different behavior. And so I think it should be treated with kind of more specific tools to help us identify the fraud there.
Fantastic, thanks, Noam. The next topic, with the velocity of the holiday season, the most obvious KPI and metric to optimize is obviously your chargeback rate. But as we all know, there are other metrics that fraud experts within these merchants are held accountable to, right? Such as acceptance rates, customer experience, things of that nature. So I'm going to pose this one back to Alexander. From your perspective, you've been on the other end of this, and now you're currently helping merchants to protect themselves. How can merchants optimize not just chargebacks, but all these metrics and balance security and customer satisfaction?
So that's the big question, isn't it? How can we embrace the customer experience journey while also making sure that the merchant is secure? In my opinion, the best way to do that is to make accurate determinations, and an accurate determination is going to look different based, like you said, it's going to be, or like Noam said, it's going to look different based on the industry that you're operating in. All these different verticals will have different red flags. They'll all have different categories to look at. However, I feel that the most effective way to reach accurate determinations is by expanding your data sets relative to identity information. That's my personal opinion. And the reason for that is based on my experience, right? When I was operating as a bad guy, a lot of my methods were based on the manipulation of identity information. Now that can be as simple as a shipping address or a phone number or an email address, but it can go all the way out to lines of credit for these merchants who might have in-house credit offerings and in-house cards. It's important to know how the identity information over time has been tracked across a merchant network, or maybe a consortium of information, or a consortium network. So from the ground up, accuracy is number one. And the more that a merchant encounters new engagements with new pieces of information, the less accurate those determinations can be. So that would be my number one suggestion, generally speaking. And it can be applied to a lot of different ways. If you think about a new customer who just started, using your website today, if your proprietary data is what you're relying on the most, or all you're relying on, you're not going to have anything from the past to consider when you're making a determination. You're going to have to do the escalation process, or you might offend good customers because they have a mismatching shipping and billing. Whereas if you subscribe to expansive data sets, you'd be able to see that indeed this billing address or this billing information has been associated with, this shipping address that's 3 states away and has resulted in good transactions over 4 years. So that would be my number one goal, would be to expand data sets. But what you can do without paying for a new service is, again, to put data in every touch point across the customer journey. And the reason for this is it's unintentional, but it is definitely true that every touch point across the customer journey is also a touch point for a fraudster. So the customer journey, the fraudster journey. If you start looking at different points along the path, you'll start to see what kind of methods are being employed against your company, and then the data can justify automation in the future.
Great response. Fantastic. You mentioned something about expansive data sets and looking at certain identity vectors and obviously training your models that way. So I want to pose this question to Alex Zeltzer. You have experience on the other side of the coin, right? As a former digital good merchant yourself, now a solution provider. What, from your perspective, what's your take on what Alexander just said from expansive data sets, and then what other things can digital good providers and merchants do this holiday season do to help pad their security, right? Is it just expansive data sets? Are they looking at behavioral analysis? What do you think is important for them?
Yeah, so first of all, I completely agree with Alexander here. I think it's clear, the more data you have, the better your decisions are. There's no question, and it's more than that. It's the more accurate the data you have, the better decisions you have, and it's even beyond that. It's the more accurate tagged data you have, meaning you have a better understanding of which of your former transactions were actually fraud and actually legit, is where you really get down to it. I think that from our experience, both as a merchant and at Ensure, the most important element is to understand if you are declining any orders, trying to find a way to identify which of those declined orders were actually false positives. And I'm not talking about trying to get a sense of what percentage of your decline is actually false positives, because that you can do with a test group, and that's fairly easy to do. Not cheap, but fairly easy to do. However, that doesn't help you in tagging the data correctly. And what we found, I think, is that trying to track consumer behavior post-transaction and trying to pose different kind of challenges, not necessarily as friction, but actually post-transaction, is very, very helpful and very insightful. Part of the things we're doing together with some of our merchants is that as Ensure AI, and that was, I think, what led us eventually to decide to spin out the technology that we've created as a merchant, because we realized that that's a unique element that is sometimes overlooked. And I take it back to one of the points you mentioned, Alexander, the point on accuracy. Accuracy is the name of the game. If you really wanna balance the declines and your chargeback rate, which is the game we're all in, and the essential part is obviously approving more. I think in our domain, especially in digital goods, where the fraud pressure is much higher, as Noam indicated, and the fraudsters are much more sophisticated, the tendency is usually to decline more in order to keep chargebacks at bay. And once you do that, the worst part of it is not having a really good understanding of who your false positives are. So I would say the best advice I can give, regardless of what kind of tools you're using, what kind of data sets you're using, try to figure out which of those that you've declined are actually false positives, feed that back into your decision process and use that for the next time.
Great, thanks, Alex. Moving on, I kind of want to move into the realm of what happens when a merchant does get hit, because unfortunately, as history shows, some of our merchant friends will get hit this holiday season. So I want to pose a question to Brock, who has the authority in that realm. What are some things and best practices merchants can do to help mitigate this risk and win more chargeback disputes, right? And secondary question to that, right? With the rise of friendly fraud, Brock, how can merchants win more of these? Like friendly fraud is rising quite a bit. And how can merchants, after this holiday season, come Q1, once they receive all these chargebacks, win more of those disputes? I think, Brock, you're on mute.
There we go. Okay, sorry about that. All right, so I'll answer in reverse order. How's that? So in terms of policies, practices, I would say number one, a couple of things. Number one, make sure product descriptions, the checkout process, terms and conditions are clear, so customers know exactly what they're getting and when they can expect it. That cuts down on service-related chargebacks, like item is not described, or when a customer doesn't get a good in the time frame they expect. Second thing is, we know there are going to be problems this year with delivery times. There's a shortage of delivery truck drivers. Everyone knows that. So, as a merchant, keep on top of which courier services are successfully managing their operations and route your packages through them. The process for return should be clearly described in your T's and C's. And last thing I would say is, if you are dealing with a rise or pre-existing high level of chargebacks, consider implementing a generous refund policy. Encourage your dissatisfied customers to seek refunds instead of filing chargebacks. It's a lot easier in the long run. Now, in terms of the timing and best practices to win more disputes, I would say, first of all, make sure you're collecting compelling evidence that you're in the right. Visa says compelling evidence is evidence that there's proof the cardholder participated in the transaction, received the goods or services, or benefited from the transaction. So if you have evidence to that effect, you can fight and win the chargeback. Now, one thing we see is that merchants, they sometimes fail to document the checkout process thoroughly enough and capture the evidence that can win friendly fraud cases. And if you want to drill down on what's relevant evidence, I'd recommend starting with Visa's got a doc online called Dispute Management Guidelines for Visa merchants. Start there. Pretty simple and straightforward. Also worth a mention, if you're dealing with high ticket retail goods, consider including a signature requirement on deliveries. Now, last year, signatures were waived by many companies with COVID, and that led to a jump in friendly fraud. So you should be able to go back to signature requirements now that things have calmed down a little bit. A couple of practices that I'd recommend.
Great, thanks, Brock. Just for the audience, if you have any questions for our wonderful panelists, please just type it in there in the chat box. I'll see them and I'll be able to ask them towards the end of this conversation. With that, I think I have about one more topic. We have time for one more topic, guys. So I think I'm going to go back to Alexander here, and it's going to be fairly general. The holiday season gives everyone anxiety for different reasons, and for fraud analysts, it gives them anxiety because of the velocity and the volume and other very obvious things. But from your perspective, why is it so difficult? Why Why is there so much difficulty for merchants in respect to fraud?
That's a big question. So in my experience, fraudsters operate the same way throughout the year as they, the main difference I'll say between the fraudsters operation during the year and the holiday season is because they have the same wants that we do. Or, when I was operating, I had the same wants as I do today. I want to get gifts for people. I want to do all this. So the drive is definitely, it's there just as much as any normal person. Throw into the fact that they effectively have unlimited funds because they have unlimited information. There's another set of information they can get to. And you'll see a lot of tests. You'll see a lot of trials. You'll see a lot of people selling guides online that say, hey, do you want to hit this store? Here's how to do it, with the cardable sites lists that are found on the dark web and have even started to pop up on the surface web. So that's the why. There's a lot more to it, but that's, generally speaking, that's the why. And to be clear, it affects in-store purchases. It affects BOPIS, the buy online, pick up in store, the alternate pickup. So it exists everywhere. But of course, with the shift to e-commerce, there's going to be a lot more going on with us. So what I would suggest is, instead of making a clear determination based on the information that, say, limited, I'm going to speak from the perspective of like a bare bones Shopify installation. There's maybe 10 data points you can leverage between the payment information, the personal information, and then maybe some historical data based on the account. If that's there, you have very limited information. So instead of forcing determinations to be made immediately, maybe set up a rule set that allows you to kind of play with that idea and put some type of escalation process in place where, yes, it'll be more friction, but if you're dealing with limited tools, it's going to allow you to reach a more accurate decision in the end, rather than just outright denying or outright accepting. So that would be my advice. There's the why, and I took it a bit further to go with advice for people who are operating with limited tools.
Awesome, Alexander. Thank you. Brock, I guess same question, but from the perspective of representment, why is it difficult to fight these chargebacks more so in Q1 versus any other time of the year?
Well, it goes back to your chargebacks from Q1 relate to your holiday season a lot of times. And, the holiday season, it's a traditional shopping period, and there are people out there who don't want to spend money. So they'll buy stuff and then they'll claim an illegitimate chargeback to skip on the bill. And just like I mentioned earlier with the delivery problems, similar thing, happens towards the end of the year. A lot of people take advantage of the fact that there are a lot of packages out there, and they'll just claim items aren't received, so they can keep their products and also get their money back. So that filters into Q1, and that becomes a problem. It's sort of like the residue from the holiday season, and merchants have to deal with it, every year, unfortunately. They've become guilty of the fraud and then have to prove themselves innocent.
Yeah, it is quite unfortunate. I think last point on this, and I want to pose it to Alex Zeltzer. Brock does bring up a good point, and so does Alexander, with the high volume of good shoppers during the holiday season. It does make it more complex for merchants, and that's just a general fact. What are some things that merchants can do to better prepare for that type of complexity, to be able to, at the end of the day, get more accurate, to be able to detect good from the bad?
Yeah, so I think first of all, it's Alexander mentioned it. Fraudsters don't operate differently during the holiday season, right? It's the fact that they are blended into a much bigger audience and a lot bigger sales volumes that make it more difficult to sift through. That's the issue we're seeing, and it's even more than that. When you speak about digital goods, as I mentioned earlier, I think a lot of the attacks we're seeing are attacks that look like a wave of seemingly legitimate identities trying to buy goods online. They all look to be legitimate. Behind the scenes, they are all, could be one fraudster that operates, a farm of machines, obviously. And what makes it very difficult during the holiday season is that in addition to that, you have your campaigns that are going through that may look very similar. It's a group of individuals that is buying something that normally you would not see that anomaly in your store in September, and how to differentiate between that. And what's really important is to have something in place that can identify the difference between these different waves, the difference between what happens because of our promotions, because of how we merchandise our things, and what happens when the fraudsters come in, especially in these digital goods. So my recommendation there would be, first of all, be aware of the fact that that's going to happen. There's nothing you can do to prevent it from happening, right? It's the fraudsters are going to be there. The campaigns are going to be there. You're not going to stop doing campaigns in order to fight fraud better. That's definitely a bad advice. So it is going to happen, and you need to put in place the tools that would look at the data points that are required so that you can identify and distinguish between whatever happens during the holiday season and the overall ramp up and the fraudster attacks during that same period. And I think that's the best advice I can give on this one.
Great, thanks, Alex. Okay, I think that wraps up the panelist discussion. We do have a couple of questions from the audience. So I'm going to leave it open to whoever wants to take it. So the first question is, and I'll read it verbatim. I'm seeing a huge increase in spoofed IP addresses. So the IP looks like it's located at or near the billing address. Are there any tips to dig into that IP's info to try to determine if it is legit or not?
So I can definitely speak to, yes, that's definitely a thing that they do. What I've heard, and I'm definitely not tech savvy to that level, like where I never got into the cybersecurity, aspect of stuff. There were always other agents for hire for that. However, since I've been on this side, I have learned that there are lists of spoofing of IP addresses that are associated with proxies and spoof software and stuff like this. I don't know their names, but I know I've heard them referenced, but that might be a good starting point to look into. And maybe when something comes, if you're dealing with digital goods, that wouldn't help much. But in anything where you might go through an escalation process, you might want to check the IP against that database as well. There's a lot of ways to leverage that tool when and where it exists. So that's something that I would look into, because if someone is spoofing their IP address, I would expect that there's some software operating it, and maybe it's been encountered before.
Yeah, I want to chime in to this one. I think that a lot of the tools, the sophisticated tools that are out there today, would provide for proxy piercing technologies and would allow you to see behind whatever spoofing technology is out there to see the actual IP this is coming from, not necessarily all the way through to the actual country where the individual is, but definitely a few layers that are enough to verify that this is actually a proxy. So it's enough for you to know it's a proxy. You don't need to know what lies behind it. Once you know it's a proxy, you cannot look at the IP address. It has no value. Once you know that, you can do the rest normally as you would do with others. So my advice on that would be, yes, there are tools that would give you the information, like you see on this, like you see in the different shows on the FBI, they would pinpoint where it is. You don't really need that. You only need to know that a proxy has been used. That's enough for you to raise a flag. It doesn't mean you have to decline the order, but just be aware that that's the case, and don't assume that IP has any relevance to the decision you take.
Great, thanks, Alex. Next question, and this might be more geared towards for Brock, if I'm not mistaken, but here it goes. We have been seeing an influx in pre-arbitrations. Do you have any advice on how to prevent pre-arbs and increase pre-arb win rates? I'm concerned this problem will get worse in the holiday season. Obviously open up to the whole panel.
Well, I would say, in general, the best case things that you can do are have some of those policies that I talked about earlier, in place, that like having very clear checkout process, clear terms and conditions, document that information. The more documented evidence you have, basically, when the issuing bank is reviewing that chargeback, and you've got that evidence, they're basically just checking a list from the merchant. And, if you check all the boxes, you've won the challenge. So, make sure you've got a paper trail, digital paper trail of what the user journey has been, that you've got enough evidence to win early on. And then you'll see your case, your success rate go up.
Awesome, thanks, Brock. Okay, last question here before we wrap the webinar, and I believe this one is more geared towards Alexander, I'd imagine, but here goes. What would deter you, as a former fraudster, from targeting a merchant?
So I've answered that question a couple of times recently, and I'm glad that it's being posed here. So when I used to approach a new merchant, I developed a process called checklist building, where I would go see what the requirements were. And my process was to put in sets of information that I had no intention of getting the deliverable for, just to see what the process was. It would kind of be, spray and pray, right? It would just be a bunch of trial and errors. Okay. One company, and I'll mention them here, a Best Buy in Las Vegas, I probably did 20 or 30 attempts and never once did it go through. So eventually I just gave up. Now, so to be clear, it would go through in one stage, maybe the second stage, the email would get a confirmation of being shipped or being fulfilled. And then I would go pick it up and they say, oh, the order's been canceled. Now this is over the span of maybe 5 days total. And so I knew it wasn't the chargeback being submitted, fair certainty of, there's exceptions, but with fair certainty, I knew the chargeback wasn't being received and then them canceling the order all within 5 days. But I would still continue to try. And then it wouldn't make it through the checkout form online. So then I'd try to use more accurate information, maybe information that I'd manipulated myself. And for some reason, at some point across the fulfillment between checkout and final destination, it just did not work. And that was my white whale. That was the biggest. It made me so mad. But that is something that I feel is really important. And that's why I reinforce the idea of having preventative measures employed across the journey. Maybe the way I shopped threw a flag somewhere. Well, that's behavioral analytics before checkout. Maybe the way I loaded my cart did it. Maybe the way and that's behavioral analytics as well. Maybe the way I filled out the checkout form when I copied and pasted, or the way I typed it, something like that, another behavioral analytics. Maybe in fulfillment, whenever I would call in and try and change from an accurate billing and shipping address, and I changed it at customer service to be another shipping address or associate a new alternative pickup person, maybe that was being analyzed and stopped there. Maybe, down and all of these things are across the journey, right, that I experienced. And I can tell you that was the most effective way to shut me down, because I just got so mad, so irritated, I was wasting my time, and I just left. So even though that was a really robust explanation, my suggestion is to deter fraudsters from successfully operating with your operation. Make them frustrated. Make it clear that they can't just go in, throw a bunch of pasta at the wall, see what sticks. Make sure that they can't determine what your operation is easily, right? Because at the end of the day, if I wanted a TV from Best Buy and I couldn't get it, I'd just go to Target, right? So it's kind of rude to say, but I'll close my doors and they can go check the next house. But I mean, that's where we're at. That's in my opinion. So I think that would be the answer. Frustrate them.
That's wonderful. I mean, go ahead, Alex, go ahead.
Yeah, I have to chime in on this one. First of all, I couldn't agree more. I think that, and as a merchant, we've experimented a lot with finding ways to frustrate fraudsters, and not only by by making sure that it's difficult to follow our operation, but more than that, we would try to burn their cards. It's not an easy thing to do. Not an easy thing to do. I don't know if you have encountered that. If you had, please share. But we have tried different methods of burning the cards, and the reason we're doing that is because if you just get declined as a fraudster, as you mentioned, Alexander, you just go next door, you go somewhere else, and if you just decline and you don't let the network process it, then no one knows that this card has been stolen. No one knows that something has happened. If you find a way to burn the card, and I'm not going to discuss it at this point here, but we can discuss it further down the line, maybe in private. Then you really find a way to frustrate the fraudsters. Happy to hear your thoughts on that.
You're absolutely right. That would be another way that would just get to me. I want to, if I don't get one to go, if for a fraudster who just spent $10 on a card that should be worth $1,000 and you just burned it after a decline, yeah, that definitely got to us. So I 100%.
Awesome. Well, I think that's a good note to end it on. Thank you, panelists, for your wonderful insight. I'm going to pass it back to Bradley to wrap the webinar. But everybody, thanks for joining, and hope to speak with you all soon.
All right, thanks, Miguel. Yeah, this has been a really amazing discussion, guys. I really appreciate all the insights. I've learned a ton. Just having such a wealth of knowledge in one place is incredible from every angle. So thank you so much for taking the time to come out here. And we really, really appreciate it. And I hope everyone out there enjoyed the webinar. We'll be sending out copies and it'll be posted to the website in the coming days. So you'll be able to check it out again and listen. And thanks again to everyone, and really appreciate your time. All right. Take care, everyone. And good luck this holiday season. Frustrate those fraudsters.
Have a good one, guys. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. It was a lot of fun.
Bye, guys.
Bye.